Hi, and welcome to this latest immigration law conversation. In these conversations, I discuss with people current issues of immigration law and practice. These are just informal and scripted conversations and are not meant as legal advice, but hopefully are helpful to you and inform you and help practitioners going forward. Today, I'm joined by Diane Harris. Diane Harris is a very experienced social worker, and she also runs Harris Associate Social Work Services. So, Diane, tell us a bit about you and what you do and what your experience is.
Hello, Adam. I'm a social worker with 15 years experience of working in local authorities. A couple of years ago, 2016, I started to do independent social work, and that was on immigration cases, people applying to stay in the UK or with unsettled status, or leave that had expired. So since I've started doing independent work, I've found this particular area of interest, and I've focused my training and specialist knowledge around this area since. As part of that, I did a postgrad certificate in social and psychological inquiry to help with research. I'm a member of the British Association of Social Workers, who have a special interest group in immigration, asylum and trafficking. And that has also helped to enhance my knowledge. With the reports that I've done, I always ask for feedback from my clients, and that's allowed me to be able to adjust my work slightly and improve the content of my reports. And in 2018, because my work I was becoming quite busy and quite successful in what I was doing, I launched my business, Harris Associates. And since then, I've registered a number of other very experienced professionals. So we've got quite a vibrant team with a lot of specialist knowledge now. So myself and my team can cover quite a large area of the country, mainly the Midlands, from London to Manchester. Okay,
That's
that's
fantastic.
me.
No, that's fantastic. I wanted to talk today particularly about social work reports in cases involving children. So for people watching today, in terms of immigration case law, back in ZH Tanzania, the Supreme Court found that the best interests of children were a primary consideration. And then in the later Supreme Court case of Zoumbas, Lord Hodge there talked about the importance of understanding the child's circumstances and giving like a careful examination to all relevant circumstances. And one of the ways we can do that is through getting a social work assessment, looking at the family and looking at the child. So when you're instructed to carry out an assessment, Dan, what do you do? What's your sort of framework for making an assessment? Now, I appreciate we're recording this in June 2020 and we're still under some lockdown measures. Perhaps you can tell me what you normally do before lockdown, and perhaps then at the end just tell me a bit about how you've changed that in terms of doing it now with lockdown and social distancing.
Okay, so before the restrictions, we would always visit the family. Every assessment is holistic, so it will involve all members of the immediate family. And that's because if there's a change to one area, it's going to affect all the other areas. So even if we're asked to focus on one particular family member, like father or a child, we'll still include everybody. The framework that we use in children and families assessments it's a combination of the children's laws and guidance. So the most important one is the welfare checklist from Section 1 of the Children Act 1989. We'll also link Section 55 of the Borders, Citizenship and Immigration Act 2009. The 5 outcomes for children and young people from Every Child Matters 2003, of the Children Act 2004, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and Human Rights. So when we're doing an assessment, it's really important for us to have clear and concise instructions so that we know where we're focusing, because obviously in social work there is a wide area, there's a wide scope of areas that you could focus on, and we want to make sure that we're focusing on what's important to our clients. And also really important at the onset to know whether or not we need an interpreter. I have unfortunately had the instance where I've arrived at an assessment and parents can't speak English, so the assessment hasn't been able to go ahead. So it's really important to have those things in place beforehand. Whilst doing an assessment, I would first have a look at the family history, so the adult's family history and makeup of the family, the adults in the family support network, so that might be close, wider family, it might be neighbours, it might be to do with religious worship. We would look at health and how any diagnosed conditions might be impacting parents. We'd look at accommodation and finances. Is it appropriate? Is it meeting the family's needs? We'd look at training and qualifications, parents' employment history. They may well have very desirable skills that can be used in the community, and also, very importantly, the views of parents, why they want the outcome that they want. So then we would move on to the children. And as you mentioned, the voice of the child is vital in social work, and it's really important that voice is heard, and that their views and their wants are expressed so that they can be listened to and taken into account in the tribunal arena. Obviously, younger children, most children are not going to be presenting as witnesses, so this is the only opportunity that they're getting for their views to be put out there and listened to. So for the children, we'll look at the age, stage and presentation, because they might be a certain age but they may not be at that developmental stage. Education, any special educational needs, we would want school reports and any other relevant information to look at if they're meeting their milestones. Is there anything that's stopping them from meeting their milestones? We'll look at friendship groups, social activities, things that they're involved in. Is there any reasons why they're not being able to get involved in things? Is there anything that's disadvantaging them? Health, again, very important. Any diagnosed health conditions that might be impacting their quality of life and affecting them on a daily basis. And so for the wishes and feelings, we'll use age appropriate, either observations if it's very young children, or exercises, conversation, and a variety of social work tools and exercises to gather what they want to happen, how they feel at the moment, how they are in their current environment, because we can't ask them questions directly about immigration and what do you think if if such and such happens. So we're asking them in an age-related way how they feel about their life at the moment. So that's how we do it, and then we use obviously social work theories to analyse all of that information. So once we've gathered all the information from parents and children, and it might mean that we go away after the assessment interview and contact schools, contact health professionals, and whoever else might be involved in the family, health visitors possibly. And then once all of that information has come in, we'll collate that, and in our reports we use a balance sheet. So that balance sheet incorporates all of those things that I mentioned before, so the welfare checklist, the Borders, Citizenship and Immigration Act, 5 outcomes, Children Act, children's rights, human rights. And we will do a benefits and burdens in their current situation, and then contrast that with the possible change in their life. So if the whole family has to move to another country, the benefits and burdens of that, and then you can contrast that to their current situation. And then that gives us an observable and robust analysis that is open for anybody to see how we've come to the conclusions that we've come to, and we'll use that then to base our views of what is in their best interest and any possible recommendations that we might want to make.
That's fantastic. A couple of things to pick up on there. Let's first look at how you talked about the importance of the voice of the child. Obviously, as you said, often children are too young to give evidence. How do you sort of get the wishes and feelings of the children? Say, obviously younger children, you may just observe, but with older children, do you interview them? Do you give them questionnaires? What do you do in talking to the children direct?
Okay, so if they're old enough, so probably from about 6 upwards, 6 up to teenage, I'll give them a questionnaire, which is all about the basics of their life. So what school do you go to? What's your favourite subject? Do you have any medical conditions? Do you have to take medicine for anything? What's your favourite subjects? What's your best friends' names? So we're picking up all of that basic information through a questionnaire, but it's basic questions. There's no complex immigration questions. It's about the child. It's about what the child likes, what the child's doing, what their lived experience is at that moment in time, at the present time. And then I'll also get them to do a children's version of an eco map. So that's just basically 3 circles, child in the middle, then the most important people to them in the second circle, and then anybody else that is important to them in their life. So that gives us that picture of those people in their life, which is really important as well, especially to capture wider family members, best friends, school friends, and anybody else that's important to them. And then I will use those questionnaires to talk to the children. So if they've circled, for example, how do you feel about school? If they've circled a sad face, then I know there's an issue, and I can pick up on that and say, oh, why have you circled a sad face? And sometimes they'll say, I prefer to be at home with mum and dad. But it could be that there are issues. So that's how we'll get the likes, dislikes, and views of the child. And the last question on the questionnaire is, if you could choose anywhere to live, where would you choose? So they've got that as an open question, and it's not attached to immigration. As I say, it's an open question for them. So they're not being, it's not a lead-in question. Yes. So, and then in conversation, if they're old enough, and depending on their age, and depending if they know the circumstances as well. I'll always check with parents. Children might not know that their family may have to leave this country, and if that's the case, it's not our place to tell them, and it's not our job to come into a child's life briefly, upset them, and leave. So it wouldn't be appropriate. So we'll always follow parents' wishes in that respect.
That's really helpful, and I think it is often the case that sometimes children will know and have been told about the situation. Other times they don't, and it very much depends on the child, the age, the circumstances.
Yeah, and you can have a family with older children and younger children, and the older ones do know, and the younger ones don't.
Yeah.
So you've got to be mindful and careful around, their feelings and reactions to things.
The other point I wanted to pick up with you was you talked earlier about contacting other organisations such as schools. I don't know if you ever contact medical professionals. How do you find, what information can you glean there?
Particularly at this moment, with the restrictions that we've got in place, schools have become even more important. I've found previously that sometimes schools can be a little bit reluctant to want to comment, but during this restricted period, I've found that if I explain to schools more, we haven't been able to see the child in person, and you have got that experience, you have got that relationship with the child, and that is really important for us to capture within our reports. I found that if I explain that to schools, that they're much more willing to participate and just to provide that little bit of extra insight into the child. And it can also be things like behavioural issues. Parents aren't always forthcoming on things like that, or it could be that for some reason there was behaviour issues in the past, and school can share that information with us, and just bring the child to life, fill in the gaps of their personality, their friendship groups, things that we can't always capture, especially with video interviews at the moment.
Well, I was going to ask you, how are you doing things at the moment? Just briefly, if somebody instructed you today with the current lockdown provisions, how are you going about those assessments?
So we're having to be much more organised. So things like, obviously we have to have consent forms, and the children's questionnaires, and all of that I will now post out in advance. And then we can, once all of that's come back, we can then set up the video interviews, and all assessments are being done by video link at the moment. So generally it will be all in one go. So it'll be an hour with the parents, and then an hour with the children, depending how many children there are in their ages. So it's really important to have those questionnaires and that information to prepare to speak to the children. It's easier with parents, obviously, because they're adults. They know what it's for and what the situation is. So yeah, just having to be a lot more prepared and a lot more succinct in the questions that we're asking, I think. Yeah.
That's helpful. Just a couple of things finally I wanted to ask you in terms of the common situations we come across as immigration lawyers. So when we're making or an assessment of the effect on a child, the courts have told us, particularly the Supreme Court told us in a case called KO Nigeria, that the assessment is to be a child-focused assessment. Perhaps the two scenarios we commonly come across, and I'll deal with them one at a time. The first one is perhaps where a child has either been born here, has come here at a young age, has spent those formative years in the United Kingdom, maybe has reached that 7-year point, which is relevant for the statute and the immigration rules, but is now facing returning because parents have no leave to remain. Just for practitioners watching, the Home Office guidance, which is the 3rd of June 2020, on family life as a partner and parent or exceptional circumstances, at page 50, says the starting point still with a qualifying child is that it would not be reasonable for the child to leave the UK. And obviously we're looking at a test of reasonableness there. You as a social worker have a different approach because you're not the judge making the decision. How do you assess a case like that where perhaps a child spent their formative years here and is facing removal with the family as a whole?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to share an experience, well, numerous experiences of that scenario for children. I have met numerous teenagers, young adults who were either born here or came here when they were very, very young, and had grown up with a desire and a life plan to do sixth form and go to university and go on to a professional career. And it's only when they get to the stage, sometimes of they've done their A-levels and they're coming to apply to university, that they find out that they can't go to university, that their family's status restricts them and prevents them from doing that. And that's devastating. It's a devastation. It destroys the confidence. It destroys the self-esteem. It's a heartbreaking situation for young people and young adults to find themselves in, and then they're left in this limbo of not knowing what their future holds and where they're going to be, and they can't plan. And that's a terrible situation for anybody to be in, but particularly children. So to just go back to one of the questions that we're quite often asked, as you say, is would you consider it to be unduly harsh?
That was the second question I was going to come on to.
Oh, sorry.
No. The
yeah, it leads in.
I ask it now, and we're faced often with the unduly harsh test in deportation cases. So so often that's a case where the child is not going, but the parent, often dad, is being deported for criminal offences. A recent case called PG Jamaica said, well, just separation from a parent is not enough to render something unduly harsh. So, yeah, what comes across your mind when you're assessing that? Is it unduly harsh to either go with a parent or to be separated from a parent who's being deported?
Well, the wording unduly harsh, it's not something that exists in social work. It's not a term that we use, and I think this highlights a language difference between legal professionals and social work professionals, because we're assessing in terms of risks and need. So we're taking into account the emotional, physical, health, educational and identity needs of the children. And we're thinking about safeguarding and do risks meet the thresholds for action. So that's the terms that we're thinking in as social workers. So unduly harsh is not a term that we would work to. There's no theory or formula for us to use to say, yes, that's unduly harsh, or no, that's not. Because for us, it's risks and thresholds and safeguarding and meeting basic needs. So there's a bit of a disparity between the language used there, I think.
I think that's really helpful from a number of perspectives. One, when you're presenting a report from a social worker to the Home Office or to the tribunal, to be able to interpret your findings as a social worker and the remit that you have and apply those into the legal tests that the Home Office or a judge has to apply. The second thing is, I think it's helpful that you focus on what your remit is, because sometimes there's a danger of experts sort of usurping the question the judge has to ask, which is a legal question, and then judges getting very grumpy and sort of dismissing expert reports, thinking, well, this is advocacy and not a piece of expert evidence. And when you've stuck to your remit, and when people understand what your remit is, because I suppose sometimes client expectations are important as well. You're not going to answer that ultimate question in your report. You're going to assess through that social work framework and reach your conclusions, which will be very, very helpful. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, there is actually, because again, I think it's understanding each other's professions and understanding each other's standards and ethos and all of that. And as social workers, I mean, we're all registered with Social Work England now, previously HCPC. So Social Work England, we're required as social workers to respect and promote human rights, views, wishes and feelings of the people that we're working with, to balance those rights and risks and enable access to advice, advocacy and support services. So if we see a need, we have a duty to direct, give that information, enable people to get the help that they need. And another thing is, we're trained to work in partnership with people to promote well-being and to promote best outcomes. And a part of that is recognising that the people that we work with are the experts on their lives. They know their lives. So that's from Social Work England perspective, but also in addition to that, all of Harris Associate Social Workers are also members of the British Association of Social Workers, who also have standards and code of ethics and principles. So in addition to Social Work England, we also respect the worth and dignity of all people according to human rights. And we have a responsibility to promote social justice to the people that we work with and to society in general, which has never been more important than it is at this moment in time.
No, absolutely.
So yeah, it's quite. I don't think that other professionals always realise that that is what we're signed up to do. So we are always on the side of children's best interests. Because we're signed up to it.
I think
and it's part of our training. Yeah.
That's really helpful, because I think part of my reason in interviewing you today is for me as a lawyer and for other lawyers watching this, as well as others watching it, to understand what your remit is and what the social work remit is when you come to make these assessments and make your expert assessment. That's fantastic. One just final plea from me is perhaps that you said earlier about clear letters of instruction when solicitors representatives are instructing you to set out those instructions, and they can be then exhibited, or you can cut and paste those into your report. And I've said this on previous videos also, to make sure all relevant documents are before you. There's nothing more frustrating than having a cracking social work report, but then realizing the previous negative judge's decision wasn't before the social worker, and the report is criticized. Oh, well, if the social worker had known what the last judge had said, they may have come to a different view. So it's just a personal plea from me to representatives in making the best use of a social work report. You mentioned Harris Associates. If people want to get in touch with you, Diane, and get in touch with Harris Associates, how should they do that?
Okay, so you can either give us a call, and I believe you're going to put the link on with the
Yeah, no, I'll put all the
number.
links below. Yeah.
Yeah. We've also got a website, so you can have a look at the website. You can email, call, text, whatever method is easiest for you. And yeah, always happy to discuss a possible scenario, and obviously provide a no obligation quote.
That's fantastic. Dan, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for your insights, particularly into your role. Hopefully lockdown will end soon and we'll catch up in person, but thanks for speaking to me today, Dan.
You're very welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliant. Bye-bye.
Bye.